Okay, let's give this thing a whirl, see if it's any good. Hi everybody, have quite a bit to share. Been a huge few weeks for James and myself with Aries Libra, full moon, Mars in Scorpio. We know how Mars starts to behave if you've been following me for a bit, at least for the disciple. We talk about astral purging, and we've had a huge, very Libran style and Uranian style 7th ray expansion. It's money Eros, or Eros and money. They're the two. It's very, very 7th ray, the higher sex magic, and Libra as a sign of manifestation, which is it's a lesser known sign of manifestation. Actually, you don't necessarily think of Libra and it being a building sign, but it is the sign of the master builder because it is through the consummation of the opposites, say male, female, child, being the physical baseline variant of that, where the plan gets consummated and is brought into being. So so James had his biggest financial win, and it was a huge steep buoying upward. Now, we've been through many cycles of this for many years now, but this was one of the bigger ones, and typically it's like slow grind, slow grind, slow grind, and or slow grind, up and down, and then there'll be a tension point where there'll be a kind of stagnation and a heaving and a pushing, and then a big expansion, and then coming back down, and then a leveling out, and then by the time you level out, you're at a higher, much higher baseline. So what happens? Here's the dark feminine piece of this. So the Eros, the principle of Eros, we know that Uranus is corresponding to the 7th ray, and it corresponds to the sacral center. So this is the portal of incarnation and manifestation. We think Cancer is a 3rd and 7th ray sign, and the mother. Okay, blah blah blah. So how did this cycle, as we moved into it, what did it look like? What precipitated it? So it began with a stirring of a bunch of the sexual energy, and it always moves through my system first, and I suspect at a certain point, particularly if we're talking about people who've crossed the threshold of discipleship, you're going to see that actualization of substance in that particular way. So the female body is going to hold that point of where the initiation takes place in terms of it coming out into being in reality. So it's a stirring of the sexual energy, and my system was like, oh man, what the hell? Like, how am I meant to move with this? Because it's just like, it's all of the, we come up against all the limitations around the holding of power. And this is also, by the way, why the glamour of the 7th ray in terms of the lower sex magic, or the distortion of the sex magic, is so problematic, because the encouragement with these, let's say what becomes the distorted Western Tantra teachings, is that you get to this point, or a really early phase of this point, and then it's like, go and express your sexual energy. It's like, no, that is an impotent masculine flying off the handle with the power, rather than actually working with what is the true dark feminine process of having to direct it to blow out your lower centers, basically, so that you can actually hold energy. Because that's what we're talking about with Eros and money, or when we start working with money in a conscious way. So in other words, our experience of our capacity to increase wealth is directly proportionate to the opening up and the holding of more Eros. And it's always the Eros first, and then the finance goes boom. Okay, so the stirring of the sexual energy. Sitting with it, and I go through my own particular process. I won't go into too many of the details about that, because so much of it is that's kind of unique to my personal makeup and things like that, but yeah, the principles are the same nonetheless, or they're general enough for the sake of this conversation. So sexual energy stirs. There's a widening out that happens through the being, and there's a certain collapse of whatever separation between Psyche and Eros is still there. And then, boom, that's when the sacral opens, and there's always a feeling of, now I'm opening out into the orgasmic bliss of this. And it's no longer a tension point where it's a combination of frustration and then the identity that wants something, because that's where it gets projected out and it becomes the lust. And it's still a way in which the ego is inflating the movement and not relating to it. Okay. So there's that. There's an expansion in the sacral. Next day, boom, James pulls in, it was like 30x or something. Well, maybe not quite, maybe like 15. But it was a big jump. And then there was 2 other days post that of not quite as massive jumps, but like much higher than what the baseline had been. Okay, so where to go from there? Where am I wanting to take this? Okay, yeah. So when we think of the 7th ray, particularly coming out of a 6th ray age, I've heard some people twist the angle and say the 7th ray is a feminine ray because it has to do with matter and substance. And I can understand where that attitude comes from, but it's still not quite right, because the reality is that Uranus and the 7th ray is about the bridging of the opposites. So it's actually the proper inclusion of both. And this is where we get the hidden secret mystery of Libra, and why Libra is just such a phenomenally dynamic sign, one of the most interesting signs in the zodiac. Because it brings up, like, the whole Libran thing is a seesawing between the opposites until you hit the center, when you're no longer polarized, and then you get the integration of the hitting of the bullseye, or you've hit into the center where the truth is. And that's also equal to the consummating of the opposites, where you're no longer swinging between the two. And this is kind of a 4th ray process here. It's a process that's really understood through the transmutation of desire through Taurus and Scorpio, but then especially Sagittarius. Because Sagittarius is this very, I've never seen people get possessed more by elemental energies than in the sign Sagittarius, but it's exactly because there's a need to, and it's attributed to the Temperance card in the tarot, right? Okay, so it's like the not getting pulled in the swaying of these two forces. Okay, where am I going with this? Right, okay, but then in the context of where we are now, let's say at a collective level or cultural level. So the 7th ray is bringing the dark feminine into the picture, not necessarily because the 7th ray is feminine, but because the 7th ray brings together the opposites, and it reveals imbalances so that they can be reconciled. And this is why it's a marriage ray, or it's the magic ray, because when the consummation happens, that's when the thing comes into manifestation. So we might say, if we were living in a period where we'd have more of a metaphysical, matriarchal circumstance, then the incoming 7th ray would be bringing in the revelation of spirit. So that's just what I'm trying to say here, is that it's about the meeting in the center. And so part of so much of the polarization that we see right now is the swinging back and forward. Then people go one side and they go, oops, that's kind of not right, and then they swing to the other side and they And so hopefully, or let's say if people are working with consciousness, they'll swing between the opposites, but as they swing, they should swing less far and get closer to the center. And then when you get to the center, you get the truth. So how does this relate then to the sex and Eros? Because when we talk about the incarnating of the will and the plan and the blueprint, this is Aries that we're talking about now. The plan has to come into being, come into manifestation, and by that right, work with the principle of manifestation, and there's Libra and the third ray. And then Uranus bringing the two opposites together. Uranus is also the hierarchical ruler of Aries. So very, 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 very potent force here, and a really important sign to understand. And then Sagittarius too, for this temperance piece. There's so much there. It's a real swinging sign, actually, Sagittarius. And the Gemini-Sagittarius axis is a very difficult one for the mastery of energy. It's partly why, I'm going where I don't want to go now. But okay, so back to the partnership and then the male-female principles. So, okay, now I want to talk about a bit more of the personal experience with what happens when the uterus or the womb cracks open, and then the collective problem of the dark mother. Because for as much as people talk about, like, let's say in the new agey space or near spiritual space, about Magdalene, dark mother, priestess, so few people are actually really carrying the reality of what it means to be trying to bring into consciousness the lost instinctuality that has been banished to the center of the earth for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, okay? So we had this big expansion. It starts off with me in the Eros, boom, then the finance comes in. And the way that balances out, by the way, in terms of the masculine principle, is James is the externalized, being the male. He's the externalizer of that in terms of, like, he's technically bringing in the money, right? Like, he's doing the outer work, but at the deeper level, we're not a separate unit. This is why particularly the monogamous dynamic is so important, because the Eros actually pulls you down into the earth, and to the degree that you open up the sacral energy in this superficial way where it becomes about the multiple relations, it just allows for that which is separated in the psyche to just dart off with the sexuality whenever you get down to the place that really hurts. And that's equal to the rejection of the feminine when you do that. And I say this because it's a really problematic hypocrisy in a lot of the spiritual spaces where they go on about polyamory, and it's under the guise of this embracing Eros thing, but they're not embracing Eros because they're not deepening the love enough to actually see what's going on underneath a lot of these wild movements. And when people do that, then you face excruciating levels of pain, and most people cannot withstand it. People, we need to understand that which has been rejected by the collective, it's been driven insane and mad, and it's so pissed off that it wants to destroy the entirety of culture. And our function as conscious individuals isn't to simply touch a little bit of that and then fucking ride the wave of it. That's inflation, and it's psychosis, and it's megalomania, and it's all these different things. So when people talk about sacred rage and the embrace of rage, they're so rarely embracing the actual pain of it, because riding on a feeling isn't the same as embracing it or being in relationship to it. And so in such a case where inflation is going on, there's an impotency in the masculinity, because it's not differentiated and it's not in its transpersonal quality of love enough as undying spirit to penetrate the depths of that and redeem matter, which isn't implying that it's wrong, but it redeems it in that it penetrates it with love, and then it restores it to its true function, to its true radiance. So when we say that the feminine has been lost, when you reject the dark feminine, then that principle of life, and we're coming down to the womb here, because whenever I open through the uterus, it's like an expansion into that complete power of the creational force. And then once that stabilizes out, then it crashes into the guttural destruction of the inversion of that energy. And this is where we get the meeting with the negative mother, which is something that I carry in my personal psychology, but it's also collective. So while not everyone has the negative mother complex in the personal psychology, the entirety of the culture has a negative mother complex. So I've been pulled into it through my own personal problem. But then whenever I go through a round of it, I'm like, yeah, I'm passing through this thing collectively. And that's gotten more and more the case as I've gone deeper, where there's still aspects of my personal psyche in it. I can feel and see through the dreams, which is also why working with the dreams is important. But it's starting to get to a point now where it's like, oh man, this is like really on the verge of having to pass through collective waves of this, and it's very hard. It's very crushing energy, and the whole thing is like, it's like meeting this flower which is so beautiful, and it unfurls itself, but then the evil of the rejection consciousness is so violent towards it that it's turned back in on itself. And one of the ways in which that negative femininity shows up is, nobody wants me here, I should just kill myself. And this is like that thing that I think a lot of women meet, a lot of teenage girls especially, that almost the trope of the teenage girl that self-harms or the witch energy. But when it's directed at self. And then the other angle of it is when it moves into the rage or the persecutory side of it, where it becomes destructive, where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to burn the whole thing to the fucking ground. And this is also what's happening now when we're facing collective collapse of an empire, and that is where we're at right now. We have all the telltale signs of collective cultural collapse. We've seen them before if we look at the history. But it's the same thing that happened with the Roman Empire. And if you reject the instinctual dark for long enough, it will get forced into the unconscious, and then it will become, it's like, that's this thing that I've done so many times, right? That you turn away from it and it becomes this. But if the whole culture does it for long enough, then it eventually, and that's where we're at now. So this is also why part of this, like, priestess sacred rage, I'm going to polarize into the warped, distorted expression of the feminine, pisses me off so much, because you're just falling into the wave of that aggression and the destruction with no consciousness. And you're just willing to, it's not the same as loving her or being actually devoted to her, because then you would be relating to it, not inflating yourself with it. It's a childish, very egocentric attitude that comes from a really fragmented ego and psyche. I wish people understood this. Okay, so expansion through the sacral, open out through the womb, and then so you get the bliss, the joy, and the abundance. So if we think the matter as the aspect of the Godhead is that which comes into the embodied being, so you've got transpersonal spirit as everything that's perfect, and that gets realized through the form. So you meet the abundance, like access the Eros, boom, financial expansion. And then what's that equal to? The capacity to manifest and create more freely and quickly. Right. So we're still in early phases of this. Early, I mean, we've been doing it for nearly 10 years, and we started off with nothing. And so we've kind of come a long way in a short amount of time in one way. Well, yeah, I guess it feels really slow because we're just in the chug of it every day, but we move pretty well. But it's like seeing where we're going and how much more levels of power we're going to have to work with. And just for me personally, the kind of hell and suffering that I have to pass through every time we go through a drop like this is really, really difficult. It's crushing. It's the worst kind of self-annihilating, destructive energy, because that's like the thing that's been banished. It's like that which was once high up in the consciousness and was revered and worshipped is like turned in on itself, and it becomes destructive like that. So of course I have to just meet these waves as they rise, and to let it completely reshape my psyche and basically tear me apart in a way that's not equal to just getting lost in the psychosis, because that would be like what happens when people go into a psychosis. They get swallowed up by it, and all kinds of problems happen. But it's like it's the difference between a psychosis and a psychotic break. A psychotic break just being, as the name is, and then everything has to shuffle. But there's nothing pleasant about that. It feels like a complete, like getting flushed down a toilet or into a black hole, and everything about that you know about yourself in the entire way that the ego construct has been built gets completely sucked into that vortex right down to the bottom. So it is very, 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 very difficult to pass through. It physiologically corresponds to the uterus. Feels like sometimes I'm like holding myself down there, like I'm about to. It feels like the actual uterus is going to explode and fall out of my body. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, so it's every expansion that we have into Eros, money, power also brings with it the death and the meeting with all of that which has been driven mad in terms of the rejection of that power when we talk about the loss of the instinctuality. Now, the primitive tribes, when they were the first point of contact with a god energy was the dark feminine, the mother nature, they would have these very bloody, archaic offerings to the dark mother, where they'd slice the pig open, and it had to be blood. It was about the blood, and then throwing that into the ditch. So it's like, it's a projection, obviously, of an archetypal energy, but psychologically, what that is representative of is you offer something of yourself, and you have to send it downward and let it be eviscerated. And so, of course, we don't do that as a culture. We have no frame of reference for that. Even the way we deal with psychology, with the exception of the depth psychologists, it's still like reorganizing things or repatterning things on the surface, and it's not the actual alchemical process of the destruction and transmutation and transformation of consciousness. And the idea that you can actually be born anew again. But it's not something that you go with a group and then you perform in a ritual to try and do that. Like, this is what frustrates me about, once again, a lot of the new wave, so-called new wave spirituality, where it's like an attempt almost to reignite seventh ray ritual processes, but they still concretize it into this thing that happens like through getting together and performing a ritual or something. It's like, that's not it. And that is a regression to, let's say, the pre-Christian pagan consciousness, which also has to be reintegrated. But at the time, let's say, when it was the Christian revelation of the transpersonal spirit, or just the sixth ray, whatever, when that was in the unconscious, then we had that instinctuality outwore itself, where there was no differentiation from it. So when Jung says the gods have been banished, but they've just been sent to the underworld, it's like all those forces are still there, as they're psychological. And metaphysically, we also say deva and elemental energies that have to be dealt with. I mean, I've been talking for nearly half an hour now. I don't know if any of this is useful, or if I'm getting to any kind of point here. I guess I just wanted to say that this is very real work. I would not be able to do this without James, without the partnership. This is a partnership that was brought into being as a consequence of crossing the second degree. So I don't know how much of this is even possible for people that haven't had crossed that threshold. I still think that people can do it when they're aligned in a soul-based partnership. Maybe it's just a matter of difference of levels of energy that one can work with, corresponding to how much of the subplanes of the astral that you've passed through, because you can't, until you cross the second degree, there's just all this stuff still stored. It's like all of the lunar material is just there. At deeper levels, even if you are someone that does psychological or transformative work, there's just a certain point of until the second degree, the consciousness isn't fully transpersonal enough in its nature to be able to withstand and unlock the keys that are hidden there. That's why the moon veils a planet, because it's not till you pass through those levels and pass through what's being held that then one of those sacred planets gets revealed, whether it's the transpersonal love or the will of Vulcan, or the magic of Uranus. When I meet levels of this new feminine thing, when I meet levels of her as that which is, it's like, I say it's her, but it's the bottom line of our own individuality at the personal level. That is the God realized within the form or something, or at the base of not the personality, but at the root of matter itself. I think I have to distinguish it, because when I say personality, I tend to feel like, at least if we're playing with it metaphysically and occultly, the personality is that which has been constructed out of like the automated movements, kind of the personality as the moon. I think I lost my train of thought. Naturally, how have I kept it going? Is the question that we should all be asking in the first place. Oh yeah, so it's the root of the power of the individual, but it's a splitting open of this very deep sensitivity that I guess whenever I meet this, it's just like the desire to just annihilate the self and retreat back into the earth it's very hard to hold that feeling and to continue. And I don't know how adept I am at it at this point. I mean, I guess I've been meeting rounds with this for so long now, but it just feels like it's hard to keep going, basically. But I mean, I have a very willful part of myself, so usually I just get knocked down, and even if I'm sort of pinned down to the ground for a while, I try my best to just get back up and keep moving. But it is a very difficult feeling too, and it's hard to dissolve that personal attachment to just feeling like I have so much to offer and to share and to help, to want to help bring people into themselves, and the reality of how much crucifixion that comes with that sometimes. That's been really hard. And what I mean by that is you show someone who they are and it terrifies them, or it hurts them, or it brings up all of that which they are afraid of feeling in themselves in becoming who they are. Like, oh, if I was to live that, then I'm going to be persecuted, or I'm going to be attacked, whatever. And to just be on the receiving end of that projection time and time and time again, where it's like you're the problem for reflecting it to me, you know? It's hard, but it's also just one of those things where it's like I just have to mature through it, because it's just going to keep happening. You know, it's like, okay, you're going to keep showing up and you're going to keep getting crucified and keep getting crucified and keep getting crucified, and it doesn't matter what kind of beauty you bring. That's what's so interesting too, is that as we go into this, it's the feminine realization of God through the complete individuality and subjective level of it. What comes up in me sometimes, it's something like, the translation is, I have nothing but the abundance and beauty of Eden and freedom to send to everyone, and they want to freaking rip out my tongue and kick me into the ground and rip my hair out and skin me alive and spit on me and set me on fire. But that's the funny thing of the mutable cross life. And then, or when Jesus says, when the world hates, you know that they hated me first, or whatever. And that's just that's a symbolism, psychological symbol of just any authentic movement of being. At all. anything true. But it's like that's the pain of God. So when people go, well, why should I believe in God? Like the clueless atheist mindset. Why should I believe in God when there's so much suffering here? And then when I access places like this, just walking to a cobweb, it's like the voice of God as it cries out through her. She says, I've given you everything you could ever want and need, and to be completely free, and the humanity that you're meant to be in the perfect image of beingness, blah. But you not only turn away from it, but you try and destroy that. And that's the feeling, is like that comes up and it's like, why do I bother? Why live? Why show up at all? And that is the pain of the universal aspect of the Godhead, experienced right down in the individual core of the human being. So yeah, all this is going down with Mars in Scorpio. So just meeting a few new levels of the hell realms. We've got all this Libran activity. It becomes easy to see why Libras, and I haven't fact checked this, but I did see something pop up that says the most billionaires in the world are the prominent Libra in the chart. But of course, because it's law and order and manifestation, laws of karma and commerce and reciprocity and all of that. It's that tractor. Farmer Pete on the tractor. Okay, then in terms of coming back to 7th ray stuff and manifestation, so our next big project is the building of a new house here on this really beautiful piece of land. And the house is like, it's okay. The person who built it didn't know what they were doing. They kind of just recycled a bunch. It's got a funny dead feng shui spots. We want to build a really beautiful space. We're in the designing process of that right now. And so that's like a new level of, it's like we're expanding to the point where we pull in the finance to manifest that, and that becoming this actualization and reflection of this process that we're going through in terms of this 7th ray manifestation, Eros, money, consummating the opposites, pulling the finance, and then being able to like we expand the consciousness, vortex, pull in the new level of the finance, bam, and then bring it into being. So that's the new level. So when we get to, it's a big project. Like what we're trying to build it's big. It's not a mansion, but there's going to be several major sections to it. It's going to be able to house quite a few people, and it's a building of a sanctuary in a way. But it's all a kind of testing ground for this wisdom that we're working with. And once again, I could not do it without James. Just looking at the little mama duck with 3 ducklings. They're the resident ducks of the property. There's another mummy and daddy couple there. I don't think they've got babies yet though. It's cute. And then the moo moose. I had a dream that one of the cows was pregnant the other night. I think she's not really. I think she's just really fat because she pigs out on the hay bale. Okay. Yeah, but that'll be a threshold that we cross. When we can get to that point where we manifest that, or where we bring in the big like the multi-million-dollar deals, like that feels like that's the next thing, and we could be looking at that in the next, I mean, it could be as close as a year, but it could be, I don't know about realistic. I always have realistic numbers, what I think are realistic numbers for things, and then James goes, I think it's going to happen here this time, and then he's just always right about it. So it always ends up being close. I should ask him actually what his estimation of this is, but maybe a more realistic number would be between a 3 and 5 year time frame. But then knowing that our ability to achieve that is directly contingent upon our deeper realization of this wisdom, and to whatever degree we're unable to bring that into being, then that's yet that's the limits of our own consciousness relative to this process of the consummation of the opposites, basically. So I think that's all I wanted to say. There's a few different things. So yeah, there's the Eros money expansion, but I think just to tie it all together with that thing where I diverged off into the dark feminine piece, is that you don't get the wins, those wins when you're working with consciousness, at least, without the death into the ground. And there aren't words that are adequate enough to describe the kind of hell that it is. Everything about you gets torn to shreds. So I'm very fortunate to be with a man that is living that process with me, because it's just him and myself basically, and we're just plunging ourselves into hell. And I just don't think I'd be able to do it. Like, we wouldn't be able to do it without each other. There's just something about how the soul comes into manifestation upon the physical plane, and then it incarnates through the opposites. I'm not talking about like a animus projection here, like with what I was talking about with the twin flames, but it's just the reality of the poles express in the dual forces here. So there's a total interplay between these two that just constantly going on. And then there's also the fourth ray reality of just like that there's a certain androgyny to the human personality anyway, like with working out the anima and the animus thing, and like the internal astral space of the integrating of the personality part. So there's a it's not fluid, but there's the interplay of the opposites at the individual level within the psyche. But then this thing with the seventh ray and the coming together of those opposing forces upon the physical plane that happens. And I'm talking about it right now, it still feels like my uterus is just like dying down there, and it's hard for me to, it's like I'm fighting off this thing of like, there's no point in saying anything to anyone, Risa, because it's like people don't want to fucking hear it. They will murder you and they will project their own bullshit onto you, and it's just like, what the fuck is the point? But that's just what I'm saying, with also why it's important to continue to pass it through, because I also have to get to a point where I'm not, and maybe I'm being harsh on myself, but quite frankly, where I'm not fucking weak, where I can go, okay, this is the hell, like, I don't give a shit, I'm birthing the fucking divine creation as it's meant to be, in its purity, in its completeness, in its innocence. So fuck everything else outside of that. Fuck this bullshit ignorance, But it's like that. This is the bottom line. So I don't feel strong. I don't feel like I'm a strong individual. It's crushing still. Every time I've gone through it, it's been going through it for so fucking long now. I guess it's not that long really in the grand scheme of things. Nearly 10 years, whatever. It's nothing. It's no joke, I guess, is my point. I don't know what my point is anymore. Okay, I think I better stop it there. It's like a 40-minute rant. So we'll complete this episode with chickens. The chickens, hi, they all run. They're so dumb, it's hilarious. Peck buckets. Alrighty, I'll come hang out with you guys for a bit, because what else is there to do, let's be real. Alright, ciao homies, hope that was interesting, bye bye.